Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to today's session. I'm Asmita, your IELTS mentor here at Vedantu, and today we are going to talk about part 2 of your speaking test, which is the cue card section. It is the long turn where you have to talk about a certain experience or describe something for around 1 to 2 minutes all by yourself. So it's not a two-way conversation. You don't get much time to think. You have to essentially give a monologue, a speech, a very short speech, and that is very, very scary for a lot of you. So today we're just going to discuss how to approach this session, how you can practice, what are the kind of cue card topics that you can expect, and how to step by step figure out what to say. Okay, I'm going to take you through the entire process, and I'm also going to actually answer questions for you on the spot so you understand how it needs to be done. Okay. Before we move ahead, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and follow us on Telegram if you don't want to miss out on all of these important videos and updates. All right? Okay, so here we are. We've reached part 2. For all those of you who haven't seen part 1, please watch the video before this, which is part 1 of the speaking test. We've already covered that in detail. You need to be aware of all the different parts of your speaking test, and the speaking test is generally the hardest one for all. So please make sure you catch all the parts, all right? Now, after you're done answering the questions in part 1, you're going to be given a cue card, okay, which is going to look like this. I know you can't see what's written here, but I'm just going to quickly tell you. You will essentially... Oh, wait, one sec. All right. You will essentially get a card. This is your part 2 individual long turn. You're going to get your question written over here. I'll take you through all the questions. And then it'll say you should try. And it'll give you some points. Okay, those are general pointers that you need to cover in whatever it is that you're talking about. Okay, you're going to get a topic, describe a holiday you had recently, and then it's going to tell you you should try where you went, who'd you go with, how your experience was. So just general pointers like that, which will help you think in the right direction. Okay, so you don't start out of nowhere and you're not facing like writer's block in the beginning when you get a minute to prepare. Remember, you get 1 minute prep time before you have to speak for 1 or 2 minutes, and this prep time is extremely important because that's where you gather your thoughts and essentially decide what you're going to say. So in that prep time, you need to make use of all of these points so that you can just narrow down your thoughts. You're not thinking all over the place. You have a structured way of thinking. Okay. All right. So this is what your cue card would look like. And you know, sometimes you get very easy general questions in the cue card. Sometimes they're a little convoluted, little, you know the kind of questions they ask pageant girls, like in Miss India and stuff. Sometimes you get those kinds of questions, okay? So regardless of the kind of question you get, just remember that it's never going to be about subject knowledge. It's never going to be about how well informed you are. So even if you don't know enough about it, you're not being judged on the content of what you're saying. You're just being judged on how you're saying it. For example, if you get a difficult question like describe a law that you don't like in your country, which, it takes a second for you to think about these things. I know we all have a lot of opinions, and we are used to expressing our opinions because we are the social media generation and all of us have an outlet for our opinions. But to kind of word that in English can get a little stressful. So don't worry, I'll actually tell you more about this when I come to tips, okay? So just remember, you're going to be given 3 or 4 pointers that will tell you how you need to think or which direction you need to think in. So make use of these, right? They will help you structure your long-term speech better. Okay, I'm just going to go call it a speech. So how do you approach this section? This is what I was telling you. So number one, the first thing, whatever topic you get, whatever you're asked to describe, see, most of these questions will be describe da 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 da, or talk about da 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 da. Okay, so we are going to categorize the different questions into categories, obviously, so that you know how to approach these. For example, if it's a personal experience, you can already think about the different personal experiences you've had and already prepare them a little bit before you go in for the test. For example, you should be well prepared to speak about a holiday you took recently, or a place that you want to visit, a book that you've read, a movie that you've watched. So just general questions like these about your personal experiences, somebody who's inspired you, a teacher that has had a really good influence on you. Stuff like this, very general, generic questions related to personal experience. You need to know what to say about, and you don't have to make like a 5-paragraph full speech and memorize it for all the topics. Please don't do that. But you need to have a general idea about these personal experiences. Just think and reflect on them. Think about how you felt and figure out good words to describe those experiences. That's all that you need to do before the test, right? If it's about general topics, remember it's going to be stuff that affects the public or the community. You know, it could be about water, it could be about conservation, it could be about pollution, maybe something about infrastructure, architecture, right? And like I said, laws. So these are not things that you need to be an expert on to have an opinion, right? These are things we generally talk about on a daily basis. You know, we complain about the state of our roads, the potholes, the buildings that are collapsing, bridges that are not built properly. We complain about all of that on a daily basis. That comes under infrastructure. You know, if you talk about old buildings that kind of are historical relics of the kingdoms that ruled over whichever city you lived in. See, in India, we have a lot of historical relics in actual cities that we live in, right? So that's very good. We can talk about architecture really well when it comes to that. We know about pollution all too well as Indians. That's a topic that's been coming up in the IELTS speaking test, so we can talk at length, especially if you're from Delhi. You can talk at length about air pollution. Laws, again, stick to the kind of laws that you feel deeply about. You know, it could be a lot of people think about copyright a lot. It could be about freedom of speech, how it needs to be protected. You know, it could be about criminal laws. Anything that you have enough to say about, stick to that, okay? And again, here it's okay to get a few things factually wrong. For example, if in the heat of the moment you're trying to quote a section of the penal code over here and you get the section wrong, that's completely fine. You're not being tested on how factually correct you are. You're simply being tested on how well you can communicate your thoughts. See, I cannot emphasize this enough, which is why I keep saying this, because I know someone or the other is going to freak out about, I don't know enough about this, I don't know enough about that. That's fine. Get things factually wrong, but don't freeze. Don't stop talking. You have to speak. Speaking is your main goal. Even if you're just rambling about something, that's better than not speaking at all. Of course, we want to aim for, you know, band 7, 8 or 9. Then our thoughts need to be structured well. Whatever we're saying needs to be coherent. It needs to have a logical flow. But saying something and getting a band 5 or 4 is still better than freezing, not saying anything, and ending up with a 0 score in the speaking test, right? So now that you know about the general topics that you can encounter in this section, what are you going to do? How are you going to approach this section? Number 1. So as soon as you get your topic, decide what you're going to say, or decide what you'll talk about in 5 to 10 seconds, okay? You're getting 1 minute. That is 60 seconds to prepare for this section. 5 to 10 seconds, you are going to decide what you will talk about. For example, if it's something to do with, a personal opinion, then let's say it's about a holiday you took. Okay, maybe your most recent holiday was Manali, but it wasn't as, or enough things didn't take place. It wasn't as exciting as the holiday you took before this, which was to, let's say, Nainital. Maybe you went to Manali, everything was smooth, everything was chill, but when you went to Nainital, a lot of things happened. Your car broke down. Okay, you got into a fight with someone. All right, your wallet was stolen. Okay, I know all of this is bad, but again, it doesn't have to be just about good experiences. It could be about bad experiences as well, right? So maybe you went to Manali, but your trip to Nainital had a lot more happen in it, which is why you have a lot more to say about it. So if you have a lot more to say about a trip you took much before, fine, go ahead with that, because it'll just give you enough content to talk about. You went to Manali, it snowed, it was nice, you had fun, it was a good trip, and boom, you're out of things to say. That doesn't work. Over here, because of everything that went down with you, you have a lot more to talk about, and that's always better. So go with a more happening trip, okay? So, but you need to decide, you need to make this decision in 5 to 10 seconds, not more than that, okay? Because if you waste all of your 60 seconds just figuring out what to talk about, then you're not going to get any time to actually prepare the content of what you're supposed to say, okay? You need to flesh that out a little bit as well, which is why, boom, 5 to 10 seconds, I know what I'm talking about, not more than that. Now again, if this is about a generic topic like, I don't know, water bodies, talk about the water bodies in your city, right? So I am from Delhi, so the water body in my city is Yamuna. It's extremely polluted. How does that impact me? It impacts me in a lot of ways. There are open drains, the rivers all throughout the city have been turned into open drains. There's a foul smell, right? It impacts our devices, ACs, TVs, all of those things start malfunctioning much sooner because of the impact of the open drains. There's a lot of sulfur content, right? So I have enough to say about this. So I've narrowed it down. I'm like, okay, I'll talk about the Yamuna. If you live in a city that doesn't have a water body, and or you're not sure, you don't know much about it, then just talk about, everybody knows about the Ganga, so just start talking about it. If you're in Bangalore, there are a lot of lakes, right? So just pick a lake, and after that you can even talk about how they've built buildings and high rises, all these tech parks, right, by covering up these lakes, and because of that a lot of flooding is happening in the city, so potential problems. So as soon as you understand, and this entire process, because I'm writing it down and I'm saying it out loud, it's taking a bit longer, but this entire process should not take more than 10 seconds, okay? So you've decided quickly, okay, this is what I'm going to talk about. Now you have to structure your thoughts. The second step is to structure your thoughts, and the way you'll do that is by making bullet points. So if I am talking about my trip to Nainital, one second, so structure your thoughts through bullet points, okay? So if I know I'm going to talk about my trip to Nainital, and you're allowed to write these down and refer to them when you're talking. It's very common to blank out. This is not testing your public speaking skills. It's just testing your one-on-one communication skills. And the examiners understand, the test makers understand that when people get stressed, they lose track of what they're saying or they might blank out. So that is why you're allowed to refer to your piece of paper where you've written down everything that you are going to talk about, okay? So how are you going to structure your thoughts? Very quickly, okay, I'm talking about my trip to Nainital. What happened? I was very excited for this trip. I took a 10-day holiday because there's a lot that I wanted to do. But unfortunately, it started raining very heavily and our car broke down. We got drenched, we got in trouble. We had to ask some locals for help. But then while asking them for help, we got scammed by a couple of people and that led to a fight. We called the police. Somehow we were able to get out of the fight. Once our car was fixed, we went to our hotel. But because we were late, the room that we had booked was no longer available. Because the room was no longer available, one second. Because the room was no longer available and it was peak season, so everything was sort of booked already, we had to go to a nearby village where a kind family allowed us to stay with them, and it was the best experience I've ever had. I got to learn a lot about the local culture, how actual local villagers in Nainital actually live, the kind of food they eat. It was an amazing experience for me, and their hospitality is something that I'm never going to forget. Okay, I've quickly decided what I want to talk about. All right, now here, remember one thing. So, when it comes to personal experience, you need to talk about your own experience, right? Only then you will have enough things to say. You have to be a very advanced speaker, a very fluent speaker, to be able to make stuff up on the go. It's very difficult. Okay, now all of this, obviously, I've lied. It's all fictional. I've made this up. Okay, but chances are you won't be able to do that if you're not a very fluent speaker. So don't aim for this. Make sure it is your own experience, right? Can you exaggerate? Can you know what we call masala? Add some masala to your story. Of course, you can do that. You can add masala to your personal experience, but make sure it's rooted in fact. Make sure it comes from an honest place. Not that fiction doesn't come from an honest place, but if you try doing this, that's 2 layers of thinking that you need to do. One, you need to come up with the storyline, and second, then you need to come up with the vocabulary and the grammar and everything else to talk about it, right? So don't aim for this. Please talk about your own experience. Can you furnish it with random fake masala facts here and there? Of course, you can do that. Can you also borrow from other people's experiences and make them your own? Yeah, you can do that as well. Okay, but only if you will be able to pull it off. If you can't pull it off, then just honestly talk about your own experience. Don't try and make stuff up. All right, so that's when it comes to a personal experience. If it's something generic, let's go with, a law that I'd like to change. So if it's about a law, then in my first 5 to 10 seconds, I have decided which law I'm going to talk about, okay? So I'm going to talk about freedom of speech. Okay, I've decided. Now I have to stick to it. I can't be like, okay, no, 45 seconds into my time, I can't be like, no, I'll change which law I'm talking about. That's not good. Don't do that. Stick to it. Come up with your opinions in bullet points quickly, okay? It's very important to safeguard, all right? It's a constitutional right but there are many laws that are being passed that infringe on this right. For example, I can talk about digital broadcast bill that in my country aims to censor content on social media. Then I can talk about how TV is already very highly regulated, but social media is one place where people are free to speak their mind. Now see, I've made the bullet points in a way that will help me remember what to say. Okay, you might know shorthand, use shorthand, you might have your own way of abbreviating words, do it. You should be able to understand the points you've made. Okay, you don't have to write full sentences. As long as you're writing the keywords, okay, if I write SM, you might not know what SM is, but I know in my head SM means social media. So I can write that. Freedom of speech. I can write FOS in my notes so that I'm able to jot down my bullet points faster. So you should know what you're writing. You should be able to understand it. Nobody else is going to read this. This is just for you. Okay. Now, as you can see, it might take me much longer than 2 minutes to talk about all of these points. So why have I written down so many points? This brings me to my next tip for you, which is you need to have extra bullet points written down, because in case you run out of things to say, then you can just refer to your little piece of paper and add more information. So you don't want that, okay, 50 seconds into your monologue, you have suddenly run out of things to say and now you're panicking because your brain is blank. You don't want to be stuck in that situation. So the third thing that you're going to do is add extra bullet points. So here, instead of fleshing out each and every bullet point in detail, instead of saying, okay, this is my first bullet point, I am going to talk about this in this bullet point. No, this you already know in your head. Write down the main topic of that bullet point and then move on to the next. So make more than necessary bullet points. So in case you blank out on one of them, you can move on to the next. You never run out of things to say. And this is a good way to extend your answers as well, in case, because you can misjudge your own self, right? You might think, okay, I can say a lot about this particular thing, but then suddenly while talking, you run out of things to say. That's fine. That can happen to anybody, but at least you have something to fall back on, okay? So make sure you do that. And then how do you structure what you're going to say finally? Just keep the very normal intro, body, conclusion structure in mind, okay? Just follow this structure because it's the simplest structure that even the most easy to comprehend text and the most advanced texts follow, okay? So it's like the skeleton of any written or spoken word, okay? So here what we're going to do in the intro, number one, rephrase or paraphrase the topic. So whatever topic you get on your cue card, you're just going to rephrase it or paraphrase it in your introduction. So if you're asked to talk about a person who has greatly influenced you in your life, then you can say a person that has greatly influenced me in my life is, name the person. Or you can say, there have been many people who have influenced me greatly in my life, but if I were to pick one, it would be whatever the name of the person is, right? So rephrase or paraphrase the topic. That's the first thing you're going to do in your introduction. And then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to state your understanding, okay? So if it's about a person who has influenced you, now the word influenced can mean different things to different people. So the next thing you're going to do in your introduction is you're going to state what you think being influenced by somebody is, right? So for me, by influence, I understand, shaped my thoughts, became my role model, somebody I went to for advice, somebody I trust. Okay, so these are the things that I understand by the word influenced. So I'm going to state all of this in my introduction as my understanding of the topic. Okay, so that's for the introduction. Next, we have our body. So our body is the bulk of what we are going to say. Of course, the introduction and the conclusion are easy ways to extend your answers a little bit and are very formulaic ways of coming up with things to say. So in the introduction, regardless of the topic, I know I can say these two things. So it's not something that I need to really think about. It's not hard on my brain. The body is going to be hard on my brain because that's where I need to do majority of my thinking. So your body needs at least 3 points, right? So at least 3 main points that you're going to talk about. So if it's about a person who has influenced you, you can talk about who they are, where, when you met them, and how they influenced you, right? And this help for this section is given to you in your cue card. So it's already written in your cue card what you need to talk about. Those things go into the body. Okay, so figure out the main things you're going to cover. At least 3 points you need. Better to have 4 to 5 points so that you have extra points in case you run out of things to say. Okay, and in your points you're going to have explanations, of course, and you're going to have examples. And examples are a great way to extend your answers because if you can add more than one example, especially if it's like an anecdotal example for personal experiences. What is an anecdote? It's a personal experience or story, right, that you can cite as an example. Okay, so for me, for example, if it's about a person who's influenced you, you can cite some anecdotal examples like, there were these times when I was stuck between two very important decisions in my life and I couldn't figure out a way to make those decisions. It could be about anything. Maybe it's about, your career path. You had two very good job choices and you couldn't figure out which one's better for you. And because you didn't have anybody to help you out, you went back to the time when this person who influenced you helped you with decision making. And they said that, when you're stuck between two decisions that seem equally good, just close your eyes, take a few deep breaths and listen to what your heart says. And the first thing that pops up in your brain is the decision that you need to go with. Maybe the person who influenced you greatly taught you this when you were a child. So you went back to this, you did the entire process, and you were able to figure out which choice to make, and that ended up being the best decision you've made in your life. So this is an example of an anecdotal experience that you can share. You can cite this as an example. Not only will it take time to explain this because there's a lot of background information that you need to give, it adds to the richness of your answer, right? So adding examples is not a way just to waste time. Don't think of it as a way to waste time. It does add to the richness of your answers. So make sure you do add relevant examples whenever you can. All right. And that's the body. And finally, you have the conclusion. First thing you're going to do in your conclusion is summarize everything that you have said. So all the way from your intro to the last example given in your body, you're just going to summarize, okay, this is what I feel. Okay, and you can talk about, you can give your parting thoughts or you can talk about your future plans related to this. For example, if I'm talking about the person who has greatly influenced me, I'll say, even though that person is no longer with us, everything that they have taught me is a huge part of who I am, and I wish to pass on that knowledge to my children so that they can benefit from it as much as I have. And I also want to keep that person alive in our memories forever. Okay, so those can be your parting thoughts and future plans that you can add to your conclusion. So this is how you're going to structure. So how do you approach this section? Decide quickly, structure your thoughts in bullet points, add extra bullet points, and then figure out your intro, body, conclusion. Basically, everything that you're going to write over here is going to be part of your body. Intro and conclusion, anyway, you can come up with on the spot. You don't really have to write it down in your bullet points. All right. So now that we know how we are going to approach this section, let's take a look at the kind of topics that we will be seeing in this section. Okay. Now, as you can see, they're all describe. There are a lot of topics that we're going to talk about. So, oh, the influence you is the first one here. Okay. And what we can do is we can sort of put them into categories. Like, is this a generic community public thing? Is it a personal experience? We'll just categorize them to sort of see the variety of topics that we get in this section. Okay. So describe a person who influenced you. We can call this personal experience. Describe a book that left a lasting impression on you. Personal experience. Describe an event you attended that was particularly enjoyable. Again, personal experience. Describe a skill you have learned. Personal experience. Describe a historical building or monument in your country. Now this is general, generic, community, right? And it's in your country, so you can literally talk about anything. You have so many options. So saying, I don't know much about monuments is not an excuse. That's not an excuse you can make, because literally, even if you don't know anything, you know about the Taj Mahal. You know at least 3 different facts about the Taj Mahal, where it is, who built it, and what kind of structure it is, right? So that's enough for you to talk about, okay? For 1 or 2 minutes, you can stretch that information. So saying, I don't know about this is never an excuse, and you cannot change your cue card. You can't say, I have no idea about this. Can you give me a different cue card, please? That's not something you can do. So even if you don't know, you're going to attempt. You're going to try talking about it, right? Make up random information. Can't think of any monument, make one up. No one's going to check factually if everything you've said is correct or not, but don't just freeze and not say anything, okay? Next, describe a famous person from your country. Again, generic, community. Festival or celebration in your culture, generic. Describe a meal you enjoyed recently. Personal experience. Describe a piece of art or music that you like. Personal experience. Describe a sport or game you enjoy playing or watching. So you're given ample choice. Think about it. Piece of art or music that you like. And again, art has a very broad meaning. So there are many things that you can talk about. So don't get stuck in, oh no, what am I going to say? You get ample choice in every topic. You describe a sport or game, again sport and game, that you enjoy playing or watching. So you can't say, I don't play any sports, because watching is given as an option. And you can't say, I don't watch any sports, because at some point in your life, you have played a sport. Even if you were made to by force when you were in school, you have played it. So it's not like you've had no experience with this whatsoever. With all of these topics, you have had some experience. They are meant to be generic, right? Because this is not a specific course with a particular discipline that you are applying for. This is not applied sciences. This is not sociology, right? This is very generic, applies to everybody, okay? So your educational background, your cultural background will not hamper anything when it comes to understanding the question and being able to talk about it. You will always have something to say about each of these. Next, describe your favorite season or weather. Again, personal choice. So there is personal experience and there is personal choice, right? What do you prefer? What do you like more? So a lot of these are actually personal choices. So we can just change that a little bit because how we approach these will be different. Okay. Now, the personal experience, why this is different, let me explain why this is important. Personal experience topics will be in past tense, okay? Personal experience topics will be in past tense because it's about something that you've already done, right? Personal choice will be mostly in present tense because this is your opinion on something and that's bound to stay the same for at least a good period of time, right? So personal choice question, present tense, personal experience, mostly past tense, which is why it's important to differentiate between these, right? Now, describe a teacher who had a positive impact on you, personal experience. And if you're like, okay, none of my teachers were good, when you were a child and all your teachers were pathetic and they beat you up for no reason and were really mean to you and completely lowered your self-confidence, I am sure at that point in your head you came up with what an ideal teacher should be like. So whatever that imaginary figure was, you can describe that imaginary figure. Just portray them as a real person. This is a little bit of leeway that you have where you can lie. And it's not unethical to lie on the IELTS because if by any chance, that like 0.1% chance that you haven't had a particular experience that they're asking you about, you still have the capability to imagine that experience. And so you can imagine it and talk about it instead of saying, no, I've never experienced this, and that's the end of your answer. If you say, no, I've never experienced this, you're going to get no points whatsoever, right? If you think you can word your answer in this way where describe a teacher who had a positive impact on you. If you think you can get away with saying, unfortunately, I've had no such teacher, all my teachers have been da 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 da, but I can describe what a good teacher in my eyes would be like. If you think you can get away with saying this, then you do, but I'm telling you, it's a lot harder to make things hypothetical. If you want to talk about something that's hypothetical, you need advanced grammar, you need advanced vocabulary, and so you're going to get in trouble if you don't have that. Much easier to just lie that you had a teacher in the past who had a positive impact on you, okay? Describe a family tradition or custom, personal experience. Describe a technology you use often, personal choice. Describe an adventure you would like to have in the future. Now, this is a hypothetical. So here you're talking about an experience or an adventure that you haven't had yet, but you would like to have in the future. So just remember when something like this comes up, even though this is personal experience, because it's hypothetical, you're going to use would. I would like to do this, I would like to go that, I would like to go rafting in Rishikesh, whatever it is that you would like to do, I would like to go skydiving. Make sure you're using would or I'd. Even instead of using the word would, remember to use contractions. Because you're trying to sound like a native speaker and native speakers use contractions all the time, nobody has the time to say, I would do this out loud in their busy lives. So remember to use contractions. It'll make you sound so much more fluent. You will sound like a native speaker if you use contractions. So make sure you do that. I'd like to go rafting in Rishikesh, okay? Then you just explain why. The reason I like to go rafting is because I've heard a lot about how exciting it is from my friends. Then explain the entire experience. Then you can talk about, even though I know it's dangerous and there have been a couple of accidents, I'd make sure that the company I choose follows good safety standards and have proper equipment before I go rafting with them, okay? Now, describe a product you recently purchased, Personal experience. Describe a famous tourist destination in your country. Now this is generic. Describe a time where you had to solve a problem. See, this is so vague. And vague questions are the best because first, could be any kind of a problem. Literally, the problem could be something as mundane as, we lost electricity in our apartment, and for some reason, everybody else had electricity except for us. And my sister had an extremely important meeting to attend or a job interview to attend, and her laptop was not charged. So I had to solve the problem quickly. We couldn't get hold of an electrician, but I figured out what was wrong. So it could be something as mundane as this. It could be a very high level problem, maybe at work, maybe in college. Maybe you solved a problem in your neighborhood where, people who work for animal welfare and feed stray dogs in the community got into a fight with people who were against feeding stray dogs. Stuff like this is happening a lot around us these days. And so you were able to mediate and you were able to come up with a solution that both parties were okay with. So your problem could be something very mundane, very everyday, very basic. Your problem could be something very high level, very sensitive, very abstract. Depends on how you describe what a problem is, which is where in your intro, where you're going to state your understanding, right? So that's where you give your stance, what your stance is related to the question. That's where you describe what the problem is. And you have a lot of leeway here. So questions like these are actually nice because they really allow you to personalize your answer a lot more. Next, describe an outdoor activity you took part in. Oops. Personal experience. Talk about a time when you received good news. Personal experience. Talk about a situation when you had to wait. Again, had to wait. So vague, and you can personalize it to a great extent. Maybe you were waiting for results, right? You took, always take an exam. In India, we have the habit of saying, gave this test, gave that exam. It's always take. So you took a test and you're waiting for the results, and a lot of your future hangs or depends on that result. So you had to wait anxiously for it, and it turned out to be good. Or even though it turned out to be not in your favor, in hindsight, it all worked out for the best. Whatever it is, right? So it could be waiting for a test result, waiting for a medical diagnosis. So maybe you fell sick and the doctors just couldn't figure out what was wrong with you. You felt awful. You had all these pains, but somehow your blood work suggested that nothing was wrong with you. And for none of the doctors that you consulted could figure out what was going on. And finally, you had this one test that ended up giving you the right diagnosis, and you could get treatment for whatever the problem is. So, could be waiting for anything. It could be waiting for a flight or a train, right? It could be waiting for a trip to happen. It could be waiting for a person. Maybe somebody you knew went abroad and you missed them a lot and you were waiting for them to come back. Okay? Very open-ended and a lot that you can personalize here. Describe any law which you like. Even though this is your personal opinion, it's generic. It's related to the community. So we'll put this under generic community. Describe an unusual meal you had. Personal experience. Describe something healthy you enjoy doing. Describe an interesting person you met recently. Again, here, if you feel like I did not meet anybody interesting, I don't even step out of my house, it's okay. If you don't step out of your house, just make up an interesting person, right? You always have the option of making things up. But like I said, make sure you have the capability. Make sure you're able to justify it. Make sure you're able to make it sound realistic. Basically, make sure you're able to get away with it, okay? Next, describe a new law which you would like to see introduced in your country. So here, you can see a rising trend in the IELTS where you're asked these more critical thinking type of questions, right? Which is great because language gives us the ability to think critically. So when it comes to, don't be very ill-informed in life. It's okay if you are. But when you're preparing for the test, just some general things that concern community, you know, a little bit of politics, little bit of laws, little bit of, you know, environment. Be aware of what's going on with regards to these things in the world, because these are things that you generally need to talk about as adults, right? These are things you need to start caring about as adults who are going to vote, who are going to bring about change in their surroundings. And if you're going to a different country, you eventually aim to settle down in that country and get citizenship for that country. In that case, you need to be a responsible citizen for them, right? If you are an immigrant there, eventually you aim to become a local. Any country would want worthy people to become a part of their voting base, right? So that is why having opinions on these topics is a must. And while you're preparing for the test, make sure you read up on these things. That has double benefit, two birds with one stone, because not only are you becoming more well informed, you're also improving your English by reading good articles written by you know, experts in their field. I would suggest reading editorials, going to good news sites, not some random articles on the internet or some WhatsApp forwards, right? Go to reputed sources. If you're talking about India, then Hindu editorials, Indian Express editorials, or you can read Wall Street Journal, New York Times, The Guardian, stuff like that, okay? So make sure you're reading from good sources. Not only are you getting accurate information, but you're also improving your English in the process, both of which you need to do for this test. Again, it's not, don't think of it as UPSC level, oh, I need to memorize all of this. I need to know they're going to ask me very pinpointed questions. That's not going to happen. Very general, broad idea you need to have about these things, okay? Describe a time you did something unexpected. Ooh, personal experience. Describe an activity that made you feel tired. Again, such a vague question that has, these are easy. Vague questions are actually easier to answer because you can personalize them. Describe something you've always wanted to buy. Personal experience, but hypothetical. I've always wanted a VR set. Okay? Whatever. Describe a place you visited where the air was polluted. Ha ha ha. Here, if it was me, I just say I've only visited places where the air was cleaner, because the city that I live in has the most polluted air in the entire world. Okay, so those are your topics. So again, what are the common categories that we saw? Basically, we can put it into three different buckets. We have first our personal experiences. Next, we have our personal preferences. And third, we have our general opinions, right? So when it comes to personal experiences, it's always going to be past tense because it's an experience we've had in the past. If it's hypothetical, it be I'd like to, or I've always wanted to, stuff like that, okay? If it's a personal preference, that's a, okay, I'll come to that later, but if it's a personal preference, you can just say, pick one and justify. Or if you're not given a choice, then state your preference and justify, and this is going to be in present tense usually, right? And general opinions, again, to do with either community, law and order, environment. These are the general topics. And you must have, don't have a very contentious opinion, don't have a very hot take when it comes to these things. Don't say something so radical that, see, the examiner is trying to be unbiased and only judging you on your English. But if you say something so radical, if you, for example, you know, you go and you just like say, I am racist and I defend racism, you can't get away with something like that, okay? Don't take a very radical opinion. I hope you don't have an opinion like this to begin with, but don't take a very radical opinion even if you have one. For example, if you're communist, that's considered a rather radical opinion these days. So just try to not get your communist side out and don't vehemently defend your communist stance in front of the examiner, okay? Just chill out a little bit, give a generic opinion that's commonly acceptable, okay? All right, so these are your common categories. Now we're going to look at sample answers. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about starters, okay? So whenever you starting this is not a direct question or this is not a two-way conversation. So essentially it's going to give us very speechy vibe. But to make it a little casual, when you're starting, after you have paraphrased or rephrased the question and stated your understanding, which is basically the intro, and you're getting into the body, then make the experiences, if it's a personal experiences, make them raw and honest, okay? Now don't try to make it sound very formal. Don't try to be fancy and impress. If you're talking about a personal experience, for instance, let's pick up a topic. Describe an unusual meal you've had. Instead of simply starting it off by the most unusual meal I've had, even in the intro, you can say, I am not very experimental when it comes to food. But I had a rather unusual meal recently, and surprisingly, I enjoyed it. And then you go ahead and explain what the meal was. So instead of simply saying an unusual meal that I had recently was, which is also fine, if you can't think of anything else, that's also fine. But starting on a personal note is always a plus, because it shows the examiner that you are able to express yourself through language, right? It's very easy to practice like 50 different cue card topics and come up with memorized starters for each. And because we've come out of the Indian education system, rote memorization has been a big part of our life, which we need to unlearn if we are trying to go study abroad, because it's going to be a very rude shock to you when things don't work like that. Understanding is valued way more than rote memorization. And because you haven't been brought up in a setting where your understanding was valued or application of knowledge was valued, you're going to find it very difficult to adjust. So use this test as an opportunity to kind of start preparing yourself for what's to come. Always know that memorization is an easy way out. If you think memorization is hard work, if you think that if you've memorized an answer, you've done something very gratifying. That's not true. Memorization is a cheap, easy way out. Your basic agenda should be to understand the use of language, functional use of language. We're not even going for literary usage, right? We don't care about, we don't want to sound like Wordsworth. We don't want to sound like Blake. We don't want to sound like Shakespeare at all. Shakespeare would probably score a band 1 when it comes to the IELTS test, right? We don't want to sound like them. We want functional use of language and to be able to express your basic thoughts and emotions in a language. It's always a plus. That's why starting on a personal note will help you out over here. Similarly, when it comes to general topics, you can add a personal experience to it, even though it's describe any law which you like. So here there is an element of you in it, right? So this too is going to be personal. Nothing is going to be objective. Everything is going to be subjective. I hope you understand objective versus subjective, right? So make sure everything has you in it, okay? So that's just a little bit of what I wanted to get in there, so you can try working towards that. Now, you know what, I'm going to randomly pick one of each and quickly take you through how we can do this. So starting from personal experience, which one do we pick? Let's do describe a skill you have learned, okay? So if I were to talk about describe a skill you've learned, 5 to 10 seconds I need to think about the skill. So the first thing that comes to my mind, I'm talking about cooking. I recently learned how to cook, okay? 3 seconds, I'm done. If you think I've thought about this in advance, I promise you I have not thought about this in advance. But if you think I have, then I'll quickly come up with another skill. A skill that I've recently learned is carpentry, okay? So I can come up with at least 2 or 3 skills that I have recently learned. I made a box recently, so I've learned woodwork, okay? I've learned how to use a saw, an electric saw and a handheld saw. So I can talk about that, but I feel like I'll have more content if I talk about cooking. So I'm going to stick to this, okay? What are the different things that I'm going to talk about? Let's quickly jot those down. So how are you going to take your notes? 5 to 10 seconds, you've decided, okay, this is what I'm going to talk about. Then, okay, even though it's a basic life skill, I learned it very late in my life. It was due to the COVID situation that I had to get myself to learn cooking. The reason I never learned cooking in the past, and I know what the reason is. As soon as I read the reason I never learned, it'll come to my head, okay? So I don't have to write that down over here, because remember, these notes are for you. So because I am answering this question right now, these notes are for me. So I am going to write them in a way that I am able to understand, okay? So the reason why I never learned cooking, then I had to change the way I think, okay? Cooks are easily and cheaply available in India. That's why I never thought about cooking. But the cook at my home and my mom really helped me out with cooking. My favorite cuisines to make, probably Mexican and Italian, and controlling your nutrition also. Okay. So those were my 60 seconds where I figured out, okay, all of this is what I can talk about, okay? And now roughly, this wasn't entirely 60 seconds, right? So if I have 10 to 15 seconds left, I can quickly chalk out my intro, body and conclusion. So my intro will be, even though this is a basic life skill, I never learned how to cook. The reason I never learned is because this. Then during COVID, I realized I have to know. That's when I had to change the way I think. Cooks really helped. My cook and my mom really helped me. Now I love making my own food because I can control the nutrition, and my favorite cuisines are this and this. These are examples, okay? So I've added explanations, I've added examples, everything seems sorted. Now, if we were to start the timer, which I will do on my phone over here, then we can talk about this for 1 to 2 seconds, okay? Just give me 1 second. So 2-minute timer. If you exceed 2 minutes, that's fine because your examiner will stop you. Make sure you speak for more than 1 minute, okay? And it's always good for your examiner to kind of start getting like, okay, I need to stop them now. That's a little better than stopping early. But just once you record yourself enough times, once you practice enough times, you will be able to tell exactly when your 2-minute mark is up. For example, when we brush our teeth, we know we're supposed to do it for 2 minutes, but do we always put the timer on and time ourselves? No, we have a fair idea of, okay, this is when my 2 minutes is up. So that's the same thing that will happen to you if you practice enough times. It will become a part of your muscle memory, okay? Right, so let's start. So a skill that I have learned recently might not come across as a skill that needs to be learned to a lot of people because it's a very basic life skill, but I only got around to learning it recently. It's cooking. And I think the reason why I never learned how to cook is because cooking has a lot of societal implications and gender-based connotations in my culture, and that put me off from a very young age. So girls in my country are expected to help out in the kitchen. If they have brothers at home, the brothers never help, but the girls are always expected to help out in the kitchen. And the reason for that is when they get married, it's their responsibility to feed their husbands and their husband's parents. And because I've sort of been a feminist ever since I was a little girl, the way I rebelled against this patriarchal mindset was to not learn cooking at all. And my parents even supported me in this. They thought I could use my time in better ways. And so I spent most of my time studying and never learning how to cook. But after I moved moved out of my house and started living by myself, even then I never felt the necessity to cook because in India you can get cooks for cheap and it's a good way to provide employment to people who are not skilled or not that educated. And so I've always been in favor of employing people to cook my meals, and again never felt the need to learn how to do it myself. It was only when COVID-19 hit and everybody had to be in their own homes that I understood the value of cooking, and thankfully my mom at that time really helped me out. That's my 2-minute mark. So see, I have exceeded 2 minutes. I couldn't finish my conclusion. So here I will wrap up what I'm saying very quickly. And see, you can see so much content you can get just for something as basic as a skill that you've learned. Because human beings come with a lot of baggage and it's okay to communicate that, right? So now I'll just quickly wrap this up. So my mom really helped me out. She taught me the basics of cooking, and that's when I figured out that cooking is actually an enjoyable process when you don't have societal pressures attached to it. My favorite cuisines to make are Mexican and Italian. And another thing, so I'm going to leave this nutrition part out because I don't have time to talk about it. And now I'm just going to conclude. So now that I've re-looked at cooking and relearned what it means to me in my life, it is a very cathartic and enjoyable experience for me, and I'm glad that I've added this one good skill to my skill set. Okay, that's my conclusion for describe a skill that you've learned recently. So you get the idea. Now let's do the same exercise for a different kind of category. Let's do it for we've already spoken about laws, so let's try to take describe a famous tourist destination in your country. So let's do that. Now here, 1 or 2 tips that I'd like to give you is that don't complicate your vocabulary, okay? For this part, there's already a lot going on, so complicating your vocabulary is just going to make things harder. Keep it appropriate. Knowing good adjectives to describe places or experiences is great. So when you're preparing for these common categories, just have your handy list of adjectives ready. Figure out good adjectives that you can throw in here and there and memorize those. That level of memorization is fine. That works. Okay. So what are we talking about? Describe a famous tourist destination, right? Okay. So, now here you have so many options. You think of India, so many different tourist destinations. I'm going to go with McLeodganj. Okay, McLeodganj is my favorite tourist destination. Now I'm going to come up with my reasons why. Now this I'm giving a very personal opinion again, because nothing, even the general opinion ones have your opinion, right? So if I'm not going to talk about my personal experience of when I went to McLeodganj, instead I'm going to state reasons why McLeodganj is a good tourist destination in my country. So first I'll start off by saying, India is very diverse and there are so many different cultures and so many different things to see. It's one country that has all the major religions in the world and has religious sites for all of them, right? So there's something for everyone in India. But a particular tourist destination that I would like to recommend to people is McLeodganj, because ever since China took over Tibet, going to Tibet has become sort of difficult and the Tibetan culture has been dispersed and lost. So McLeodganj is a good place to look at, to experience Tibetan culture, Tibetan food, Tibetan Buddhist practices, and it's very close to Dharamshala, where the Dalai Lama lives. So overall, if you like adventure, there's stuff for you to do here. If you are a spiritual person, if you just want a peaceful retreat, then this is a good place for you. If you like trying new cuisines, this is a good place for you, right? So these are my general points. Now, this time what I've done is, I have divided all my points into chunks. So instead of writing a bulleted list like this, I feel like this is a better way for me to organize my thoughts. I've just divided them into chunks of information, and each chunk I can perhaps talk about for, let's say, 30 seconds, okay? So that's why this works for me. Now let's start talking about this. Are we ready? Okay. And see, I'm doing this completely unprepared. So you see how casual it can actually be, because it's essentially just like telling your friend why McLeodganj is a good place to visit, right? So, India is a really diverse country and it has a lot of different cultures, a lot of different cuisines. All the major religions of the world find a home in India. So there's something for everyone here. Difficult to just pinpoint one place, but a place that I would recommend is McLeodganj. And the reason why I do that is because it's very different from all the other places that you can visit in India. McLeodganj is close to Dharamshala, and Dharamshala is the place where the Dalai Lama lives and runs his government in exile. Now, after the Tibet's Chinese occupation, it's become really hard to go to Tibet as a tourist, and a lot of their cultural practices have been squashed due to Chinese communist policies. So if you want to experience true Tibetan culture, see what their lives were like before Chinese occupation of Tibet, then McLeodganj is a really good place. You can see a lot of Tibetans practicing their ways. You can see how they practice their religion, which is Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism to be precise. And you can also try out their local cuisine, which is delicious. Thupka especially is kind of a noodle soup that is really cathartic and really fun to eat. There's something for everybody to do in McLeodganj. So if you like, if you're an adventurous spirit and you like trekking or hiking, you have good mountain ranges there, especially the Triund trek, which is quite popular. But if you're not that kind of a person and you just want a nice spiritual retreat, then again McLeodganj is a great place for you. So regardless of what it is that you want to do, you'll always find something in McLeodganj. All right, so that's my time, and I was able to get to my conclusion here as well. So I've covered all my basic chunks, and dividing it into chunks actually really helped me out with this one, because I was just able to move from chunk to chunk. And like I said, it should take me about 30 seconds to cover each chunk, and that's exactly what I did, right? So I hope that gave you a good breakdown of how to approach part 2. Here, I didn't use very complicated vocabulary to show you that it's not necessary to use complicated vocabulary, but we, in the future, as you get better, once we do a little bit of vocabulary, flashcards, and more classes on speaking, we'll also have sessions where I will use more complicated vocabulary, so you can start emulating that as well, okay? Now, what are my final tips for part 2 right now for you is, don't aim for advanced vocabulary. And to give you an example, when I was talking about McLeodganj, I didn't really talk so much about the scenic beauty of the place. I didn't talk about scenery, because it's not necessary for you to like a place just because of its scenic beauty. But and I gave a lot of historical references as to why it's a good place. But if you were talking about, I don't know, let's say Switzerland, when you're not Swiss, but if some Swiss person was talking about Switzerland, then scenic beauty becomes a big part of it. Like, okay, if we are talking about a very scenic place in, maybe let's say Ooty, right? So if scenic beauty is a big part of that tourist destination, then you need good adjectives to describe, like it's serene, the water's pristine, it's green, it's lush, right? So you can use these kinds of words to describe the place that you're talking about. But because for me, that was not the highlight of the destination, that's not what I focused on. So don't aim for advanced vocabulary. Again, aim for relevant vocabulary, right? Focus on describing your experience. So describe your experience or opinion honestly, right? Don't try to impress. Okay? Now, even though I talked about something that happened historically that people can have different opinions about, I didn't give a very radical opinion on what, was the occupation right? Was it wrong? I didn't go much into that, because that was not the focus of what I was saying, right? So I might have some knowledge about what went down with China and Tibet, but I'm not trying to impress with my knowledge. I'm talking about my experience and my opinion. So I'll use whatever knowledge I have to bolster my experience and my opinion, not the other way around, right? So don't try to impress, and don't worry if you get facts wrong, right? If, for example, I'm talking about a monument and maybe it was built in the 1700s, but I accidentally said 1600s, that's okay. No one's going to deduct points for getting information factually wrong. Don't focus on getting the English right. Don't focus on getting the facts wrong. Focus on getting the English right. Okay? All right. And lastly, if you wish to extend answers, how can you do that? See, both the times the information that I had written down was more than enough for 2 minutes. Actually, in the first part, kind of went beyond 2 minutes, and the second part could have gone beyond 2 minutes as well. But I cut down a lot of information to try and make it under 2 minutes, right? So, but if you get stuck, if you're not able to come up with enough things to say for 2 minutes, how can you extend your answers? First, what I've already told you, make extra bullet points. So that you always have something to fall back on. Give background information, you know, if it's a person, if it's a place. I gave a lot of background information on McLeodganj, and I gave a lot of cultural connotations for the cooking part, right? So give background information and cultural connotations, because the examiner doesn't necessarily know much about where you're from. So when you're explaining your experience to them, make sure you give relevant background information, cultural connotations that will also help you extend your answers. What are cultural connotations? For example, the whole girl versus boy thing in cooking, that's something that is not a part of American culture, that's not a part of British culture anymore, but is still a very big part of Indian culture, where girls are expected to do these things. So these are cultural connotations that you need to explain, and this will really help you extend your answer as well. Okay, now if you get stuck, if you can't think of more things to say, you can portray others' opinions or experiences. Actually, this applies more to just experiences as yours, but make sure they sound authentic. Okay, make sure they don't contradict anything else that you've said, and of course, plenty of examples. Not only do they make what you're saying richer, but they also help you extend your answer. Okay? So these are my final points for you. I hope you found this session helpful. Now, before I ask you to fill out this form, as I always do, you have to practice. I'm going to write this down. Just by listening to me or anybody else, you're not going to gain much. You're going to understand what you need to do, but until you put it to practice, nothing's going to change. You are going to pick up 2 or 3 prompts right away. You know, follow the process that I told you. Record yourself for 2 minutes. Listen, correct, and repeat. So what you're going to do is you're going to pick up a prompt. You're going to follow the same process. Keep a piece of paper handy. Do what I did. Record yourself talking. Listen to it. Correct your mistakes. Repeat this cycle. Record yourself, listen, correct, repeat. Record yourself, listen, correct, repeat. This cycle you need to do until you are completely satisfied with how you sound. Once you're satisfied with how you sound, move on to the next prompt. You have to do this, otherwise you're going to get nowhere. You have more than enough prompts to practice with in this video. Pick up the ones you find easy first and then gradually move up, okay? And fill out this form if you haven't already. You'll get expert guidance to help you with every step of the process when it comes to studying abroad. So make sure you benefit from this, because it is only here for your benefit, no other reason. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and follow us on Telegram. Don't forget to practice. I will see you again next time. Take care.